This workshop on accelerating API testing with automation. My name is Alex Butcher and I'm the development lead on API testing for API Connect. Pick the right screen. So just a quick bit about me. So yeah, I'm development lead, as I said, for API testing. I'm also development lead for a product called WebSphere Service Registry and Repository. I've been with IBM for almost 10 years now, working all that time in the integration space. And I've spent almost the last 4 years of that time working in particular on API testing. So why API testing? Now, obviously, given the world we're in, where we have far less time than we used to, we need to be able to catch stuff as soon as possible. In theory, as before it can get anywhere near any of our real users, and ideally before any testers really get their hands on something and find some real nasties in what we've been doing, or from a testing perspective to go and find what the developers have missed through their own. So shifting left with automation. So automated testing needs to be designed for two sets of people, really, your developers and your testers. Developers these days need to be able to write some tests for what they're writing, whether they are writing APIs for a gateway or for a backend API. Both sets need to be tested, and ideally that should be done through automation to make sure that when you go, this thing is good to go, you are confident in what you're releasing is of good quality. So the best ones, generally speaking, in terms of platforms to use for these, require very little code. I've seen a lot of old projects where you have a lot of quite heavyweight code to make what is actually a very simple API call and do a lot of checking of it. Those can be very burdensome to maintain, and that's one of the other things you need to think of these days is how much does it cost to maintain that testing platform that goes along with just hosting the API. A good platform will be able to be integrated into your CI/CD pipelines through plugins or commands that can be run from Jenkins. So generally speaking, obviously don't get blocked by any additional authentication, but yeah, also adaptable to where you're deploying these things, whether they are, as I say, you've got a preset gateway, so you know what the URL is going to be, or literally just standing up a Docker container as part of your pipeline that you can then make the calls against. You need to be able to accommodate all of those things as part of your automation. And as part of that, you also need to think about dashboards and things like that to get that information across to other people who need it, but obviously don't generally care about the technicalities. And one of the key things you'll see more and more is basically how quickly can you get information, whether that's actually how well your API is performing through its own analytics. But then you've also got to have a look at where's the testing going? Are we trending upwards? Are we trending downwards? Are we seeing any intermittency in terms of failures? So every other Wednesday, for some reason, we have some weird outage, that kind of thing, when we're running these. So trying to pick up on where those happen. So getting started. So within APIC, in our automated testing platform, we generate tests through various different means. By a test case, I mean, we make a request, we then run assertions against those. I will be doing demos. Most of this will be a demo anyway, but just to give an idea of what we're trying to do. So we use some intelligence to generate assertions based on two different general sources. So we either have a look at a HTTP request, so whether you've done that through the platform itself or through something like Postman, SOAP UI, basically those direct calls to a known endpoint, or do we have a look at the other side, which is here's a specification, what can we generate from that? We do provide a rich experience through a visual editor to be able to build up these test cases. And then we allow you through our REST API to actually integrate those into your pipelines, regardless of actually what it is. As long as you can make a curl request from that particular platform, you can use the platform. And then have a look at trying to get some insights into those. So as I say, can you get an idea of how well your APIs are performing, where your failures are, that kind of thing. So let's switch over to the platform. So let me just quickly load the main page. I might have left this a bit too long. Come on. Thought that might happen. I'd like to introduce you to our mascot, the crocodile. But let me just log back in. Yeah, the problem with security these days gets in the way. So this is our automated platform. So here we have a view, once it's fully rendered everything, of a series of test suites that I have that operate on a few different APIs and a historical view. So I've been running against our REST API to get some results out. Now, I will admit, something has gone slightly wrong with the graphs on here. I'm not entirely sure what's happened. But yeah, everything should actually be above the line. And some of the other graphs that we'll come on to later actually show really what's been going on. So, as I said, when you're looking at the starting point, one of the things you can have a look at is endpoints. So do I have a known endpoint that I can make a request against? So here I have a really basic endpoint. So this is an examples API that we have that I can send that request against. Now, this is a nice, easy one. There's no authentication, but obviously with all these tools, you can provide the authentication details required so that if you did need to access something which is behind, say, an API key or secret, then you can supply that information and get these results. Now, this is generally how you'll probably start off with Postman, Insomnia, SoapUI, ourselves, in terms of how do you start interrogating them, right? This is the quickest, easiest way that generally you'll start off with, because it's you might have the spec document in front of you and you go, okay, right, let's build the request up. So whether you want to include a body, so if I was to do a post, what information could I post on there from that document, and kind of try and build out from there what kind of request you want to make. So in this case, I've done a very simple call. So actually, I do need to put that back to a post, otherwise it will get confused. So now I can either save that as I did originally. So this is what I have down the left-hand side is all the previous calls that I've made. We will be returning here when I explain the hooks, because saved a few of those, which are a bit more of interest. But when you have a look at this, right, I've got a call, I've got details that I need to actually replicate that request as a test case. So here I'm actually going to generate a demo test case in my demo test suite. So here what we're doing is we're looking at the call you made, the request, so all the details, whether you've given us a body, what headers you've given us, and the response. So we try and break that response down to have a look at what actually is the content of that response. And then we generate the assertions and a few other details for that. And here we have a test case generated from that request. So here I have my endpoint URL. So this is something we've abstracted out. Now this allows us, through various other mechanisms we have, in particular the REST API, is you can actually override that variable. So regardless of actually where that API might be at any time, as long as you actually tell the test case where it really is at that particular time you're running it, it can go and call that, as long as the firewall isn't in the way. So one other detail that I did neglect to mention from the client is, unlike a lot of other browser tools that where your browser will actually make the request. So if you looked at, say, the API Connect Dev Portal test tool, there's an old Postman utility that could run in the browser. When you're actually making those calls from your browser, it's actually the browser making those requests. So this is why occasionally you'll hear testers go, "Oh, I've hit the cause issue again." So the actual API provider doesn't support the options request being sent to it, because that's quite often the first thing that actually the browser will do is go, "All right, I need to make an options request to that endpoint, and then I will make your real request, whether it's a get, a post, put, whatever." With this platform, we actually send your request to our backend, and it's our backend that actually makes that request. So we actually process a little bit of it to begin with, and then we send that request on your behalf through what is known as an agent, and you'll see that pop up in just a minute. Now, the agent gives us a bit more flexibility and a bit more control. But yeah, it actually means we never actually make an options request, and we don't actually support making an options request either. But but yeah, because we're actually using our own backend kind of entity, as I say, the agent, we actually make these requests for you. And actually that means through our CI/CD pipeline, you actually have a very consistent way of invoking these APIs. So whether you can invoke it through the UI as I've done here or through the CI/CD, it's always going to be the same kind of entity that's actually making that request on your behalf. So if you do have, say, your pipeline kind of separated from your developers through firewalls, as long as you actually allow our platform to actually go and invoke a endpoint that you say have temporarily stood up on that, then we can make that request for you. And it's a known entity, right? It's not a you're making some request from your home office, as most of us would have been doing recently. But back to the test case. So here, as I said, so we've got allow the variables for you to inject when we actually run, and then we actually break down the response that we got. We have two parts to this. So we have the payload response. So this includes the key details actually about what was sent. Well, more general details about the request is probably a better description. So it is the what was my status code, what were the headers that I got back on it. It doesn't look at the body. So the body is stored as this payload variable that we have, which then allows us to inspect it through our assertions. And you can still run assertions on all the others. We decided to go with the assertion-based platform as it just allows a greater flexibility and obviously is consistent with things like JUnit and a lot of other testing platforms. So actually from an understanding point of view, it's actually reasonably straightforward. So you can see here we have a number of, say, assert equals. We also do a few other types of assertions. So basically, is this property actually on my payload? So do I have content? Do I have a property called act? Do I have a set of products? But also what types are they? So is this an array? Now we've interpreted all of this without an API spec. We've just had a look at the endpoint that we made that request against. We also have these input sets. Now the input set is a set of variables that we can inject in at every time we click, say, run test. All of our input sets are done as individual test runs within that overall test run. So if I was to have generated set 1 as well as 0, I would actually run this test case twice. Now, because I actually don't have too many variables on there, then I'll only run this the once. We also have logical operators. So we have for each. So we'll look through an array and we will look at a reasonable number that are within that particular array. We do this for a few reasons. So you can limit it to say, I want you to only have a look at, say, 5 random ones, or we set the limit at about 80, because otherwise, if you make certain calls, and we have done this, so there was a restaurant API we were testing in Canada, and we were literally just looking for restaurants in Toronto, if I remember rightly. We had so many results, our testing was inconsistent looking for particular types of restaurant, because very simply we had too many, and actually we couldn't guarantee that we would always manage to pick out one particular restaurant that we were after to dig into. So, and that's done for performance reasons, right? If you have thousands of responses in that array, we could be sat there for a while processing all of those. And within that loop, you can check certain elements of that. So given, obviously, as you saw in the payload, it was just basically 511, 611, 711. That was a fairly basic one. We can go deeper into those structures. So we do allow you to add other elements to this without having to actually generate, or if you wanted to do this from scratch, then you could do so. So you have all the main verbs that you can supply. We have a number of different assertions. So does this thing contain, does it exist, greater than, less than, do some more complicated things with, say, assert matches. And then we have our logical operations. So if this property does exist, go and check these things, and different kinds of loops. So the for each, we just list as each, while, so obviously you can have variable, basically, while this property is still true, we'll continue digging through until you reach a state where you go, I've had enough. Set variable, I'll come on to, because that's the main one actually that I typically use, and a few others that I will admit we don't use too much of. So with this basic test case, I'm going to just run that. So this is me just testing my test case. So I'm just having a look, and here you can see I made the same request. I can have a look at the details for that, so I can dig a bit deeper. This is going to load. Thank you very much. And you can see here, I got basically the same response as I did previously. And then all my assertions that we've checked were absolutely fine. But let's take this up another level. So because I actually know this endpoint, so I'm going to make a small change to this. And this is one of the limitations when you are doing raw calls as part of this. So effectively, I've now shortened it, but added to the end. What I can do now is a very quick another request. So unfortunately, we are very good at hiding our own pieces. So what I've done is on a slightly different path. I'm not sure what it's actually doing now. I've now told it to go and get me a known product. So here we go. Here's my 511 product details. And what I can actually do now is add this to the test case. Now I am going to get a slight error in this, because currently we don't actually take too much note of actually what was in. Admittedly, that should have given me now, but well. So I can now get rid of the client. And here you can see I've now added this additional step in as part of what I was doing. Now, one thing, given I made the change to the endpoint URL and it hasn't actually taken that into account, I can now add this as an additional check on there. And here you can see I've added a new generated set and call 511. So if I add this to the original one and then run my test again, it does seem a bit slower today than it should do normally, but just live with that for now. And also, if you do have any questions throughout this, please put them into the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as they come in, but I will make sure we've got time at the end to actually go through them. And yeah, see what we've got going on there. Okay, this is running very slowly today. Get much better results than when I was running yesterday. Okay, we'll give that a little bit more time, otherwise we'll come out of it. But the key, so yeah, I'll leave that to run and I'll come back in a minute and have a look. Okay. Right, I managed to break it somewhere. Oh well. Interesting. So as well as the visual editor, we do have a code view. Yeah, it's having a bit of fun today. But yeah, so we actually write all of our tests effectively under the covers as XML because it gives us a strong schema to be able to enforce what you're actually writing. And yeah, so we have, as you can see, we have the gets, we have the assertions, and yeah, we can build those out into much more complicated test cases. So I am actually going to quickly switch over to a different one that I have in here. So as you can see, I've already got a few test cases within here, and the difference between the existing ones that I've been working with and the new one I added was I've actually put them into a published state. So much like your APIs, when you actually say, I want those to be on a gateway, then you would say publish your API. We have a similar concept for tests. So when you publish your test, you're saying this version of the test case is of a state where we can actually run those as part of our pipelines, knowing what they're going to do. I've also added some tags to one of my test cases, which is deliberately broken. And I will actually kick that off and hopefully this should come back. So yeah, so I've just kicked off 2 test cases on here. So these are real test cases. These are the published versions. So if I actually have a look in my report, now this was generated exactly the same way as I did previously. All I've done is some minor edits so that actually we'll have a look at the test case in a minute to kind of explain what we've done here. But within that single generated set, I've actually made a series of calls. So I made the same original call that was there. I've then actually used each of the IDs that came back from it and actually then run the assertions on those. Now, because I generated using the endpoint, I hit a slight issue, which was that actually 511 returns certain values and properties that don't exist actually on the other two. So here we can actually see that on here, right, I found null. And now I can go and inspect and go, right, if I can find shipping, right, so I've got modes, but actually I don't have 1 day shipping. So this is where you can actually start to, through the assertions, double check actually what are you doing. So are you saying this is valid, or what? But basically you're saying having a look for optional. Now this is something you never get with endpoint testing. You always have to be aware of sometimes the optional properties do exist, and sometimes unfortunately you make the first call you make to actually test these things out and maybe write your test around, that actually might be one of the rare ones that actually has some of these properties. So that is always something to be very aware of when you're working through this. Okay, so yeah, so I very much did break that. So I will have a look at the working copy. So this, both get individual products and the working one are the same. Come on. So as you can see, this one was successful. So actually I will open that up while this thing takes a while. So here is exactly the same. And if we actually do, we can see 1 day shipping. We are still checking for it. However, we actually don't list the 1 day shipping on the other two where it was failing. So come on. Yeah, I have to say the internet in the UK seems very slow today. I've seen multiple people have different issues today with different things. Come on. Trust that. You spend all day, all week with it, playing with it, and then on the day you've got to demo it, the thing seems to fall over. Right, let's. Okay, there we go. So here is where I've actually gone a bit beyond what we did originally. So if you remember rightly, we had that for loop where we were having a look at this _1 property and we just went must be float. Now I'm actually taking that and actually using that for later parts in the test. And this is where the set variable stuff comes in. So here I create a variable called ID, and using a bit of Groovy code. So we use the Java Groovy scripting language to actually allow you to perform basic operations on those. We do include a small number of libraries to help do some other operations on those, even do some checks on there. So here I'm actually saying round, because we end up treating that number as a float, we therefore have 511.0. I need to get rid of that 0, so that's why I round it. And then I can actually use that as part of my next call. And because I set the variable in here, in terms of the scope of variables we have, we're able to carry on. So this is where we actually start to get beyond that, say, simple testing of going, right, here's my request. All right, now I've got, say, my auth token, and this is where set variable is incredibly useful. Right, do your login first, get your token, and then you can use that for your subsequent requests as part of here. And for here, basically, I listed all the products, and now I'm getting the individual products. Now, the 1 day shipping was the one I called out in terms of that was problematic, because it wasn't always there. But here I've actually changed part of the parameter. Now, the 1 day shipping is an assert is. So it's not an assert exists. Well, obviously, if it didn't exist, we would go, yeah, that's a problem. This is an assert is. So we just check that 1 day shipping is a Boolean. And here I've actually changed what is generally false to be true. So if it does exist, it checks it. If it doesn't exist, we ignore it. So that's a good way of actually testing those kind of intermittent optional properties that we might get depending on the kind of object that we return. So this also does have a for loop within it. So this is why we go from _1 to _2 within this, and obviously we just went through what the result for that would look like. Now, obviously, once, as I've said, so if I actually come out of here, if it's going to actually do anything, come on. Okay, yeah, having a funny day today. So within, what was I going to say? So yeah, so obviously we built these test cases, and let's say, because that was it, I was going to quickly touch on published. So yeah, so once I'd actually finished editing, then I would actually publish what we have, and that would replace the published version with what our working copy or draft version would be. So that allows you to develop your test cases without, say, necessarily impacting the current version of the API. So if you're, say, v10 of your API and you're starting to do stuff for 1.1, you can start doing that stuff on the working copy without actually impacting 1.0. So when you're actually ready to do that upgrade to 1.1, then actually you can then publish those subsequent test cases, and then those are the ones that take effect. Now, I've been running this for a few days now, so I have been generating some results, and this is where we will generally show actually correct results, unlike the main dashboard page. So, it should be, yeah, still trying to, yeah, I think someone's doing something else on the cluster. Because yeah, I should have a few graphs actually in here. But anyway, so yeah, so in here I'd be able to see like the last 2 days worth of events, and it would show me the graphs. Here we go, finally. So here you can see when I've actually had time to basically go and run loads of curl commands to actually call the hooks and start to generate these graphs. So I'd be able to see, say, over a couple of days, right, right, these are my failing test cases, here are my working ones, and actually then start to very quickly be able to dig into those test cases. So here I can go and see the report, or I can get a link to give to someone else who has access to the platform to go, can you have a look at this and see if you can think what's basically breaking on here, on there. So that's a very short-term view. So basically what's been going on the last couple of days is, say, new iterations have been working through. But if we want, say, a more historical view, then we have the API quality. So this is a much longer term view in terms of what's been going on. So here you can see I've been, obviously, this is about 3 days worth of me running this. So you can see the broken test case, quite a few failures, few successes. And yeah, so you'll be able to see categorically where you're trending to across, say, the last 3 months of data. Now, because this is a fairly new stack, I have only got 3 days. So I did used to have a nice old stack which had a few years worth of data. So I had loads of very nice big graphs on that. So here you can start to see some of the trends and what have you. And this is why we've tried to centralize the API testing, because obviously if you've got an individual tester doing Postman requests, how do those get reflected in, say, to a manager, how you're doing for that particular month or what have you. But anyway, so that's how we have a look at, say, the test quality kind of more historically. So if you're making these requests a lot, then you'd be able to see as a manager, go, okay, how are we doing? Right, okay, why have we suddenly dropped off? What test cases are failing, and start to question obviously why. Now, obviously I've mentioned a few times that I've been running hooks. Now, what are hooks? So hooks are effectively our API call that allows us to invoke these test cases. So for hooks, now I have a few of these for various reasons. The hook is basically just a URL for a test suite that says, basically has a unique ID on it that we can then use to go, I want to make that call. It is an entirely random ID. It is not generated through the use of the test suite name, because as you can see there, I've now got 2 for demo. So the hook gives you the base URL, and we secure that using a key and secret. So here I can very quickly generate a key and a secret. that I can then use to invoke any of those hooks. Both of these values at this time are randomly generated. You can replace them if you wanted to with your own. But yeah, I will add in best practices, you can always get the key back. We will never let you get the secret back. We do a good hash of that so that you actually can never retrieve that. And obviously when you authenticate, we double check what the hashes are of the secret you provided against the resultant hash when we actually save this. Now, how do we invoke that? So this is where I come into some of the nicer scenarios that I've got saved. So here is a hook I prepared earlier with a lovely API key secret in plain text, but obviously these are headers. You need to know what headers you're actually sending in these cases. And here, now I saved this at a particular point yesterday and this is full demo. And as you saw, I had 4 test cases within that. So now I can send this request, and hopefully it'll come back in a reasonable amount of time and actually tell me that I've now got 4 test cases. Yes, I have to say it is running very slow today. Come on. Yeah, someone must be hammering IBM Cloud. Come on. But anyway, okay, here we go. So here, so in terms of the request, so what I had from the hook URL I was given was up to the end of this unique identifier, and then I've just added /tests, and I can see here what tests I have, how they're tagged, and the names of them. Obviously, that's useful if I want to just check what I've got on there. But in case I actually want to run them, then all I need to do is just add /run with a post. Now, I haven't given this a body. I'm just saying run all the published test cases within that project. Now, one key thing here is that I will actually only get 3 results because I didn't publish demo 2. So here I can see get products, work and get individual products, and get individual products. And here you can see the top 2 passed, absolutely fine. But here I can actually see a number of failures that happened, and I can start to think about, okay, what went wrong here? So here I can see assert is, and that I've got an array of shipping modes, and that actually, yep, that definitely doesn't exist. I have to rerun that now. Oh, this is so slow. Anyway, okay, so I'd actually saved this at a suitable point. So here you can actually see some of the failures that happen. So very quickly you can go, right, these are the failures. What I will say is a lot of plugins actually won't interpret JSON that well. And obviously this is our format. This is how we present those test cases. We do, however, support the JUnit format. So here I have actually provided a body to it to provide some options. So I've said I want to do JUnit format. I also have this tag option, and I've changed the URL to tell it that you should be expecting a tag body. So here I've actually gone, have a look for these tags. So I can have a list. As you see, it's an array of type. So I can say have broken, integration, IVT, BVT, all of those things I can tag my test with. So the tags can be whatever you want them to be. And then I can use an operator on them to say, I don't be, as I've done here, I want my tests that are not broken. Obviously, that's a statement I put into tags, not that it relates to the current state of tests. And there are other options. So you can say I want so I want integration and broken. So that would guarantee that I would only have a certain set, and obviously not. So I can run this. And as you can see immediately on here, so I can see I had 2 test cases, and very easily you can see I had a project and I had no errors, no failures. And that is very parsable through JUnit plugins. So I know Jenkins has one. I know most other kind of CI/CD platforms have their own JUnit plugins that you can then use. And as you can see, all I've done is effectively make a curl request to get that information. So that is the basics of most of what we provide as a platform. So you can see here how you can start to construct some of the test cases in terms of the using an existing API and how we can then interpret those. However, one bit I haven't obviously touched on is, what if we're starting from the point of actually we don't have a spec, we don't have an endpoint yet, or actually I want to have a look at the specification. So obviously one of the key things, and if any of you are on the Chris Phillips, how good are your APIs really talk, one of the key things these days is obviously what specification document are we generating for. So obviously this, and what I mean by that is actually how good is your specification written. Obviously there's two elements to what I'm going to go through, one of which is how easy is it for a human developer to be able to take that spec and write a application that can consume that API. But there's also another way of looking at it. How well can a program interpret that API spec and actually generate something for you? So I'm going to load a specification I use a lot of called Bookshop. So Bookshop is an application that we've written to do a lot of our testing with, and I'll come on to that piece in a minute. And yeah, so it has a certain set of operations. So as you'd expect. So here I can see all the operations and all the status codes that relate to this. And I will say Bookshop is fairly well written because it is very much been built by us to help us achieve certain aims in terms of generating requests through what I'm about to show and something I'll come on to in just a minute. So here, now there's one status code on here that some people would argue you should have, other people would argue you shouldn't, which is 500. Because there is a chance every API will return 500. And obviously there are a few others. So gateway timeout, those kind of things might be more expected, but obviously the main ones are generally your 2xx cases and your 4xx in terms of bad request, unauthenticated, unauthorized, those kind of ones on there. So here you can see effectively a bookshop. So you can create books, you can create customers, and then you can create orders for those customers. You can also create authors, categories as needed. So I'm going to demo something that's a bit more complicated. So, so I'm going to do a get on a customer with an order, and then actually try and do something a bit more with it. So this particular piece of functionality that I'm about to show is available as part of the Cloud Pak for integration deployment for the API management capability. In terms of the raw API Connect, this part is not available, and that is the smart generation feature. From scratch and merge are part of the main API Connect one. And what I'm about to show you, when I've done what I'm going to hopefully end up with, if everything runs fairly smoothly, took me 6 minutes bang on to do manually through from scratch and merge, and to get this all linked up. So smart generation is a AI enhanced capability that we have that uses natural language processing and some static analysis of the API specification to generate a linked test, what we refer to as a linked test case for us, that actually looks to give you a much more complete test case, not a fully complete test case, I'll add, without you actually having to understand too much about that API. So here you can see actually I've generated a number of requests, a number of variables, and a small number of assertions. So I'm only doing assertions on the actual core request that I had targeted, which was the get. Now, from that get, as a human, I would be able to very quickly go, right, I'm doing a test for get of a customer order. So I automatically know, right, I need to create an order. I also need to create a customer. And we've actually, through our static analysis, we actually go have a look at, say, okay, I need to create a customer order. All right, before I do that, I need a customer. So here we have the two create customer, and the post of the order. So that's all really easy for a human to go, right, okay, this is what I need to do. Now, one thing that is not immediately obvious to us might be actually, and it should come to us, but sometimes it doesn't, is what am I actually ordering when I create that order. So through the URLs, we know we need an order and we need the customer. But through static analysis of just those parts, we wouldn't actually end up with effectively creating the thing that we're ordering, which obviously we're a bookshop. So through the natural language processing, we actually detect that we actually do need to provide a book ID, or in this case, book IDs, because it's an array and obviously we can have multiple books. So this is where actually we go, right, I need the books. And that actually does, as I say, we use natural language processing, so it doesn't need to be an exact match, which is why here we actually get a book ID as well as a book IDs, because what we get back from books is actually just the book ID. So we know, so I know adding an S on is really simple, but if we find something where it's actually ID comes back, and this is obviously it's a very common scenario actually, in that, say potentially when you create the customer, the field you get back is just ID. How do you know that that ID is for a customer if you're just looking at the payload? So this is where the NLP comes in, and we try and have a look at the request we're making as well as the response to say, all right, this is where we match. We've also generated the book IDs, and then as part of that, we also do all the delete steps as part of this. So here we've done a bit more of a static analysis, and this obviously is just good practice. But yeah, so I'm starting to run out a bit of time, so I'm just going to try and speed up a little bit. But here you can start to really see actually some power of trying to do a bit more introspection of the specification where we might actually find things we've missed. What you'll also see here is we've attempted to do some bodies. And this will be based on the examples actually within your API spec. So here we actually don't have much of an example, but we actually had an example of a date and an example of format. So we've actually filled those in. So again, having examples in your API spec help both the developers and potentially the test tools you're using to test this with to generate from there. Now, this is when you're getting started and basically you're having a look at everything. Yeah, I'm going to have a look at that. But there comes a next level, and this is the ultimate level, which is how do you know how well your APIs are behaving in production? So I'm just going to quickly switch back to my the presentation. So here we're testing the APIs, and the way we generally think about it is, right, API client calls gateway, right, that's the test case, right? That's a fairly simple way of looking at the current world on there. We now actually, with the modern microservice kind of style of architecture, we now have a huge amount of potential backend possibilities. And how do we actually know what an API request is actually generating from there? So yeah, so with this, obviously you've got a gateway calling another API, potentially another API, which actually might call two different microservices depending on, say, one field. So for example, if we have a order where you have either fast track delivery, so like next day, or standard, right, you might actually have two different microservices to handle those. But what if all your test cases never set the fast track option? So all your test cases are going through that other route. How can we actually find those? And this is where we move on to the kind of the next level. So we are now capable of using open tracing, also known as Jaeger, or now open telemetry, where you can actually look at what a single request to your gateway now looks like in terms of the back end. So where is it going? So from a trace, we can see a call. So this first part is actually the gateway. And then that's actually calling a number of other microservices or services that are within our same cluster. So here we've got App Connect and IBM MQ that are being called by data power. So how do we actually know where we're going with this? And we use open tracing / open telemetry to do that. So within our platform, we actually enable what's called Watson Insights or AI Insights. And these are, this allows us to go through and actually look at what's going on. So here I provided an amount of information. So the primary thing is to actually look at Jaeger. which is the most common platform, and we have a results limit. So we get 1,500 results within a given time period. And we also go and get some analytics data. So this is analytics from APIscene, and we actually look at the request body to actually try and help you generate requests such that you actually have something that reflects what actually caused that particular behavior that was found through tracing. So what we do with the tracing, and unfortunately I don't have time to run this, we actually wanted the other one. Clicking all the wrong buttons at the moment. Yeah, with this tracing, we generate a list of behaviors, as we refer to them. Now, I will say this is the only AI platform I will say. So we actually use the open tracing from a, say, production system to actually train an AI model, which we actually have 100% confidence in. Because, say, for those 1,500 results, we will actually get a model that will represent all of those unique traces that are in there. And we compare those to traces from your test environment. So if I had 5 existing test cases, we'll actually eliminate those from the model and return you a list of behaviors that we know are in your environments and we know you don't currently test. And so from those, we can then generate new test cases on here. So this is a basic view of the API call that was made, and we can then, say, add that test case from there. What we also do as part of this is we actually do go and get the body from the request that generated that one of those behaviors and fill that out. So this is all test data. This is not anyone real. So yeah, so one other thing about APIs, in production, make sure you redact all sensitive fields. That's all I'll add. So yeah, so from that request, we're actually able to generate a test case that is based on the smart gen stuff, but actually we're able to fill it in a bit more, and hopefully we do check that we've actually got the parameters that actually allow you to make that unique request. So as I say, you should actually end up with a set that are for your standard delivery, but also would capture the non-delivery. It won't capture every behavior because of the request limit that we set in terms of tracing, and also we time bound it. So if a rare behavior happens 1 minute outside, then obviously that would never be captured. So we're just at the end of the 50 minutes. So I have to say thank you everyone for listening. And very quickly, any questions? I'll give it 1 more minute for questions and then I'll let everyone run. Okay, I think, we do have, so let me just quickly grab the final slide. So if you do want to find some more, then ibm.biz/testapi has a wide range of resources around the platform. As you'll see, my LinkedIn is on there and hopefully on my profile as well. So if you do want to have any more questions that may come to you a bit later, just let us know and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day, especially at API Days. Thank you very much.